Welcome to The Debate. Our focus today is the UF matrix engine, a system that really challenges our traditional understanding of planetary formation and material distribution. This engine claims to map the Earth's major geochemical anomalies, everything from explosive gas craters to, high-density uranium fields, using nothing more than recursive geometry.
An extraordinary claim, and one that demands, I think, the absolute highest level of scrutiny, especially since the source material is claiming this predictive success is based purely on a mathematical lattice.
Exactly. The core data shows statistical correlations that, they place the likelihood of these coordinates being random at 46 billion to 1, an incredible number. And this alignment forces us to confront a central question. Does the success of the engine prove the existence of a fundamental, deterministic geometric field that governs how planetary matter is distributed? Or is this correlation just a highly sophisticated, engineered mathematical coincidence? I'm going to argue that the emergent correlations backed by those staggering odds confirm the engine is mirroring a natural, universal law.
And I'll be maintaining that while the UF matrix engine shows this unparalleled mathematical elegance. Its predictive success really hinges on fixed, non-empirical parameters that seem specifically derived and chosen to maximize hits in geographically and geologically extreme zones. For me, that makes the correlation circumstantial, not causal evidence of some new physical law.
I appreciate that distinction, but let's be clear about what we're dealing with. This is not some glorified database. The engine is a computational lens, you could say, that reveals the Earth's self-organizing structure. The statistical improbability is, for all intents and purposes, mathematically conclusive. It validates the system as a fundamental field model rooted in two main drivers: the golden ratio, phi, which dictates the most efficient helical distribution, what mathematicians call phyllotaxis, and, of course, the closure patterns of the 118-element periodic table. My position is really supported by the engine's internal mechanics. It uses what it calls the hydrogen seed, H equals 0.713851, as a foundational phase driver. Through recursive steps, this seed evolves matter through these incredibly predictable density stages, first volatile, then crystalline, and finally radiogenic. Crucially, this evolution is governed by the engine's internal pressure model, which is called the negative zone effect. It's this geometric pressure gradient, a kind of inward pull generated by the recursion, that dictates where material concentration peaks will happen. The fact that this initial H seed dictates the maximum concentration of the heaviest elements, like uranium and rhenium, by the end of the sequence, well, it suggests H is the generative axiom building the entire planetary mass structure.
Okay, I see why you think that, but let me offer a different perspective, one that's really grounded in the system's construction. That mathematical structure is aesthetically pure, I'll give you that, certainly. But the geographical correlations, I believe, stem directly from how the engine was constructed to optimize its coordinate generation. The statistical odds, no matter how high they have to be contextualized by the fixed, non-empirical constants being used. You cite the hydrogen seed value, that H equals 0.713851, as foundational, but the source material explicitly defines this as a derived bridge constant. It's calculated by taking the standard atomic weight of hydrogen and dividing it by a specific matrix constant, and this constant is necessary to achieve grid stabilization within the engine's underlying 36-node spatial lattice. So this strongly suggests the constant was optimized to make the math fit the required geometry, to achieve geometric stability, rather than being some independent physical discovery.
That is a valid point about the derivation, I'll grant you that. But the real weight of this model rests not on the specific input constants, but on the sequence of material it predicts. And this brings us right to the interpretation of the phase transitions. If the system were merely tuned to hit hotspots, it would just hit them randomly. But it doesn't. Instead, we see this orderly, chemically sequential unfolding that perfectly mirrors the periodic table. We can actually trace the H seed's life cycle. Node 371 maps perfectly to the Yamal Peninsula, which is famous for those massive methane blowout craters.
This represents the kinetic phase-light volatile gas outward pressure. It's entirely consistent with a hydrogen-rich volatile reservoir. Then the recursion continues to node 646 in the Altai Mountains, known for gold and telluride deposits. This is the structural crystalline phase-inward compression stabilizing complex lattices. And finally, node 837 in Kazakhstan, a major industrial source of uranium and rhenium, represents the mass anchor phase, maximum geometric compression, resulting in radiogenic stability and density. This systematic evolution from light gas to heavy solid, all dictated by the geometric progression, is a perfect physical manifestation of atomic principles writ large across the entire lithosphere.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that the specific material progression proves intrinsic causality. The geometry itself preordains the pattern. The engine uses golden angle phyllotaxis, which, yes, is highly efficient for non-random distribution across a sphere, but it also mathematically guarantees clustering at geometric extremes, specifically the polar convergence zones. So you successfully found Yamal, the world's most unstable gas reservoir, huge outward explosive pressure, and you found Altai, an ancient, stable orogenic belt defined by intense inward tectonic compression. The engine found two perfect geophysical pressure opposites, so it shows the engine is excellent at finding existing geophysical pressure gradients that define these material extremes. But you are then interpreting those geographic pressure differences as intrinsic material phase transitions that define the periodic table's evolution.
The correlation is geographic and structural, not necessarily an inherent material law revealed by the math.
That's a compelling point. But have you considered that the energy values derived from the nodes correlate precisely with the type of energy inherent in those phases? Let's just look at the numbers. Yamal's node signature aligns with an energy value in the range of 10 to the 16th joules. That magnitude precisely matches the kinetic pressure required for those explosive methane eruptions. Now, the Altai node, node 646, it has a slightly lower calculated energy value, but this energy is latent. Its potential energy stored in intense tectonic compression and the binding energy of the crystalline lattices, like gold tellurides. The math actually captures the distinction between kinetic energy release and potential energy storage. That suggests the mathematical progression is translating geometric position into actual physical energy states.
This is where we run into a major issue of interpretation. You cite specific energy signatures for Yamal and Altai, implying they're from independent physical measurement, yet the energy value itself is derived from the sinusoidal recursion. E is proportional to the sine of I times h, where I is the recursion step. The energy is fundamentally an oscillating function of the recursion step, I. It's not an independently measured constant of the physical location. So if the energy is defined by the mathematical step, and that step is designed to hit an extreme, then claiming the energy type matches the location is, well, it's a bit tautological, isn't it? It's an interpretation applied after the fact. How can you be certain that the energy of the explosion isn't just the mathematical peak of the sine wave being mapped onto the biggest bang you could find nearby?
I'm just not convinced by that line of reasoning because it minimizes the correlation. We established there was no mineral map or geographic data built into the engine script. The system confirmed its locations independently. The fact that the peaks of the geometric function align so precisely with known energy release zones means the math is modeling an energetic reality. The geometric pressure gradient, that negative zone of inward pull, it provides the framework, and the sine wave simply expresses the energetic state of matter within that gradient. So whether the energy is derived mathematically or measured empirically, the mathematical model works. It describes the physical outcome with extraordinary accuracy.
Let's pivot back to the constants, if we can, because they are the source of my deepest skepticism. If the system is truly fundamental, why is the primary phase driver, the h-seed, a derived bridge constant that requires external coefficients just for grid stabilization? And why is the longitude increment fixed at exactly 137.5 degrees, the golden angle?
This fixed angle, it's a deliberate technique. It's known as irrational phase locking.
It guarantees that the coordinates spiral outward in the most efficient packing order, like the seeds on a sunflower head. This technique mathematically ensures the system avoids repetitive, low-density coordinates and instead guarantees these quasi-periodic resonance patterns.
These resonance patterns, by their very design, maximize the chance of the coordinates landing near geomagnetically or geologically interesting spots that are already known to scientists, areas along major rift zones, for example. It looks like intentional engineering to maximize the hits that come out of it.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame it very differently. The constants aren't empirical fits. They are the irreducible mathematical drivers of the system. The builder used established geometric principles like phi-based phyllotaxis because they are found throughout nature, from botany to spiral galaxies, as the most efficient energy-minimizing distribution systems. The fact that 137.5 degrees is used is simply an acknowledgement that matter organizes efficiently in 3 dimensions using these irrational constants. And the h-seeds derivation, while I acknowledge it, has to be considered in light of its ultimate predictive power. The models confirmed that this single value, defining the simplest element, dictates the maximal concentration sites of the highest mass elements, like rhenium. The engine forces us to see hydrogen not just as an element, but as the generative axiom that guides the self-assembly and density stratification of the entire planet.
I do acknowledge the lack of explicit geographic data tuning, which is a powerful defense against simple data fitting. I'll give you that. However, the mechanism of predicting element density remains, for me, mathematically driven rather than physically discovered. If the energy is calculated as an oscillating function of the recursion step, i.e., then the system is fundamentally designed to produce mathematical peaks and troughs. The developer, knowing the Earth is highly stratified and prone to geological extremes, simply interprets the mathematical extremes geospatially. For instance, a mathematical trough where the sine wave is minimized is then interpreted as the maximum compression zone, predicting a heavy metal deposit. The correlation is emergent from the math, sure, but the math itself is constructed specifically to produce these quasi-periodic extremes, which just so happen to align with planetary hotspots.
You are proving the elegance of the formula, not the existence of a governing geometric field.
But we have to consider the structural tendency you point out, the polar bias, as a feature, not a bug, of the system's ability to model planetary resources. The initial coordinates, nodes 1 to 200, they cluster heavily in oceanic and polar regions, the hydrosphere and the cryosphere. These are, fundamentally, the planet's largest reservoirs of hydrogen and its compounds. It's mapping the distribution of its own seed atom from the very beginning of its life cycle. And this is reinforced by the terminal closure. The 900th node lands precisely on the Arctic pivot point. This represents the terminal reset, a return to a state of pure geometric potential at the planetary axis. It completes the life cycle of the H-seed, volatile to solid to recycled potential. This toroidal closure proves the system models planetary self-recursion. It suggests the entire geological structure is following a bounded cyclical pattern defined by that one initial H parameter.
That's a compelling narrative, but have you considered that this terminal reset is just a necessary outcome of the geometric method? As you recursively plot points using bounded trigonometric functions and the golden angle, the mathematical tendency is always to converge nodes at the poles and along specific spirals before the lattice closes. The 900th node landing on the Arctic pivot is primarily a confirmation of the mathematical closure requirement inherent in deterministic bounded spherical phyllotaxis. The material significance, the Arctic ice, the planetary pivot, is secondary to the mathematical requirement of returning to the geometric origin point of the system. We expect a phyllotaxic system to have high densities near the poles, so interpreting this as a life cycle closure, it feels like applying a material narrative to what is, at its core, a mathematical inevitability.
But the inevitability itself is what's so profound. Why does the fundamental geometric necessity of the universe, expressed through phi-based recursion, align so perfectly with the geological necessity of planetary matter distribution? The fact that a mathematical concept, this negative zone geometric pressure gradient, aligns with the known distribution of dense metals under geological pressure, that is not a simple coincidence. It suggests the geometry is the field.
That
is a leap of faith from correlation to causality that I'm unwilling to take without independent empirical verification of the field itself.
The engine's ability to trace the H-seed's complete life cycle from mobile kinetic gas at Yamal through crystalline stabilization at Altai to the radiogenic dense mass anchor in Kazakhstan is overwhelming evidence of a recursive geometric field at work. When statistical analysis confirms a 46 billion to 1 probability that the hits are not random, the conclusion really must be that we are observing a fundamental organizing frequency that exists regardless of the builder's intent. The evidence points to a universal law.
While the UF matrix engine represents a profound and, yes, a mathematically pure system, we have to maintain scientific skepticism regarding the claim of a proven governing field. The coordinates successfully found geological extremes because of the clever geometric design principles, the phi-based phylotaxis, and the reliance on an optimized fixed constant like that derived H-seed. The result is a stunning set of correlations that perfectly align extreme geography with extreme material science. But until we can isolate this supposed geometric field and test its influence independent of these pre-selected mathematical parameters, this remains an exceptional example of mathematical structure mirroring planetary structure. It is not yet a universal deterministic law governing geology.
But what the material clearly shows is the immense value of applying non-standard, self-organizing mathematical frameworks to explore planetary geology and the deep and, I think, hidden connection between fundamental physics and geographical distribution. There is obviously much more complexity here that warrants investigation.